guys, and welcome for the second and more interesting part of our critical fire staff and ice gauntlet build for season 3 in New World. As you might already know, in part 1 I just gave a brief explanation to what the build contains, and of course I just wanted to let you know what would be the best choice of an artifact for the light build of a fire mage in season 3. In this one, in the part 2, we're gonna speak about different topics that are highly recommended and of course desirable from you guys in order to play to the full extent of the build and to perform at the highest levels. The topics that we're gonna discuss today are in 6 different graphs, and they will be the skill tree and the reason for every single one of the things that we're gonna choose in them. On the second, it would be attribute points, why we're gonna go for those attribute points and what we benefit from them. The third will be perks and the reasons for those perks, of course, why some perks are better than others and what we are trying to achieve with them. The fourth point, we will be discussing the gems in the armors and the weapons, which means why we should use rune glass and why in some cases we should not use rune glass. The fifth point for this video will be heart runes, the different options for using a heart rune, which one is the best, which one is for solo play, which one is for team play, and last but not least, complete view of defense and offense with also a short explanation of the empower, how empower cap works, why it's so important for us, and why we need to have it in mind every time we're trying to build ourselves into a damage machine or light user. So without further ado guys, let's go right into it. Let's go over the first point, which is the skill tree of the 2 weapons, and we're gonna start off first with the skill tree of the fire staff. If we look at the fire staff skill tree, we're gonna see the 2 main abilities, which are Pillar of Fire and Fireball, and of course the only gateway ticket, which is the Burnout. I'm always going for Pillar of Fire in all 3 different passives, just because the last one is giving you a nice percentage of mana whenever you hit a target. This is really necessary, especially now in season 3, because the mages are mana hungry a lot due to a small change that was made in the attributes, which we're gonna talk about a little bit later. So keep in mind, mana is super important. So what we have, Pillar of Fire, 5% bonus damage for each smolder stack, and then of course mana on initial hit. We have the passive that doesn't consume more mana on heavy attacks and will also give you 5% mana back if you hit the target. We have the other passive for heavy attacks, which is reducing our cooldowns by 10%. The must have 5% in power when we are over 50% mana. So as you can see, there is a second reason why we need to have a high mana and why it's so important for us. Then we have the next passive, which is light and heavy attacks inflict a stack of smolder on foes, dealing 5% blah 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 blah. So as we said, smolder or the old burning effect is super important in order to increase our damage for the Pillar of Fire. The next passive is clear casting. After not taking damage, you are basically dealing 5% more damage. Something for a range user, it shouldn't be a surprise to go and pick this one. It's super nice to have a little bit extra damage, and as we know, the fire staffs are not always into the fight, they are a little bit on the side, so this is a really nice pick. Then of course we are looking into the Fireball. The Fireball, they're self-explanatory spell, we all know it, so must have. Then we have the first upgrade of it, just because it has a smolder on an impact. Fireball hits now apply a stack of smolder on targets, which means that, again, it gives an extra bonus damage for your Pillar of Fire, since the Pillar passive gives you 5% for each stack of smolder, each stack, and you can stack that up to 5 times, which is 25% more damage. I'm not going for the last passive of the fireball, just because I think that those 10% of mana are not really worth it, and also the 7% cooldown of the fireball is also not worth it. I don't have, unfortunately, a spare point, and I really need all the other points to be used as they are currently, so that's why I'm not using this one. On the left side, you need to go with the extra critical chance on your abilities. After all, we are playing a critical mage, so everything that gives you critical is must have on your skill tree. So in this case, 10% critical chances for all your abilities, and of course, while holding Fire Staff, your critical strike damage is increased by 15%, something that is really crucial for this build, and it's really crucial for the Fire Staff in general. This boosts the Fire Staff critical damage up to 1.4% instead of 1.25. And last but not least, on the left side, Rune of Helios, increasing our damage with 20%. It's extremely strong ultimate. It's a must-have for any mage that wants to deal damage. So, as you guys know, all mages wants to do damage. You need to go for that. On the right side, we have Pyromania. All attacks deal 10% increased damage against targets with burn or smolder. So, as we said already, our goal is to apply as much smolder stacks or burning stacks on the enemy, which means that this will increase our damage even further if the targets are already burning. So, must have. Of course, you don't have other option as well, because you need to otherwise choose Flamethrower, which will be the fourth ability, and you would not have any space to slot it here. Then we need to pick either Heat Up or Let It Burn. I personally prefer to go for Heat Up, because if you manage to dodge an attack of an enemy, it will basically put a smolder stack on them. The damage is not that high, but just the stack itself will give you an extra boost of damage whenever you hit them with a pillar later on. So I prefer to go with this option. Of course, the other, which is giving you 10% Fortify whenever a target is burning, is still good, but as we know, the Fortify on light users specifically is not that great. If you are playing medium or heavy mage, I would consider this one to be the better one. Then we go further and we pick up the Burnout. Burnout is our only ability that can lead us a little bit of distance, and of course to manage to maneuver in different places or different structures. So it's really nice ability to have. I think you all know how it looks like and what does it do. Of course, we're gonna go for the both passives, because the first one is giving us 5% cooldown for each enemy that is hit by the burnout. This means that if you can manage to drift into few people and then get the other part of the ability outside of them, so you don't end up in a clump and getting killed, you will have a really nice cooldown on your ability to use it sooner instead of waiting the full cooldown. And then of course the second Heated Up, the second passive of it, it's giving us a lot of extra damage at the end of the burnout, which means that if you time it well and you know the exact distance, you can actually apply a double hit, which sometimes can end up to 5k damage on both hits if you crit, which is super nice. Last but maybe one of the most important passives is Watch It Burn. So let's read it really carefully. Critical hits with Fire Staff abilities inflict a stack of smolder, dealing 5% weapon damage. Critical hits. This is one of the best examples why I'm using critical Fire Staff build. With this perk, if you manage, for example, to hit a fireball and you crit someone, you can actually apply 2, even sometimes 3 because of a bug, I think, stacks of smolder instantly, which means that you can instantly then follow up with a pillar, and your pillar will have 15% more damage if you manage to apply the 3 stacks. The same goes for any other ability. If you go with the burnout will apply a smolder. if it's the end of the burnout and you hit the critical, you apply another smolder, and you are having those extra damages every single time that you crit. So critical, guys, on the fire staff, this is the first really important spell that you need to have in mind. So that was for the fire staff. Let's go over to the ice gauntlet. So for the ice gauntlet, there are different, of course, scenarios where you can go a little bit more team-based game or a little bit more self-defensive game, let's say. I prefer to play exactly this tree just because it's really mobile. You can go deeper into enemies' backlines, chase their healers, use the shower for that purpose, and of course you can use the shower defensively as well. So there is a lot of discussion on this one, but I will just explain the skill trees. So basically this time we will start on the right side. You want to have the pylon. Pylon is your best friend. It provides you a lot of damage. It's really nice tool to generate your heart rune really fast, which means that you would maybe use it more often than not. So pylon is the first thing that I go for, and I go all the way up to here because the ultimate frost ability gives us a 5 meters distance around the pylon, which is like a circle, in which you can run faster if you pick the quick frost passive. Also in this 5 meters, if you cast any other ice gauntlet ability, for example entomb or shower, you would be able to reduce all your other cooldowns by 20%. So this means that if I just wasted my shower and I'm still under pressure by enemies assassins, if I stand on my pylon and I use entomb, I will reduce the cooldown of the shower by 20%. And as you can see, 25% cooldown, and this is after 4 refreshings, by the way. 20% of those 25 seconds is quite a lot. So you have to have that in mind. So pylon all the way down. Then we have ice shower. Of course, we all know what it does. The first upgrade is increasing the duration of it, which means that you can play around it a lot more and not for just few seconds. Then the quick shower, which gives you an extra movement speed, which is extremely good for you and your teammates. And then the last passive, which is also super nice, increase the damage over the targets that are passing through the shower just because you are applying rend to them of 10%. Now of course the quick frost that I mentioned before for 10% movement speed while on frosted area also applies with the shower. So those 10% and those 25% will stack up, and every time you pass your shower you will have a 35% movement speed, something that is so cool that you will be able to escape any enemy that is chasing you. Then the last ability that I'm using here, I think it's one of the best, if not the best ability in the game, defensive of course. This is the Tomb. And Tomb is a super nice tool. It actually does a little bit of damage, but that's not the most important. The most important thing is that it cleanses every single debuff if you have the secondary passive. Literally in this meta there is so many debuffs that you would see your bar sometimes full with red. You need to cleanse everything in order to be healthy. So this is one of the best spells for this patch. And of course the middle passive gives you 25% fortify after breaking out of entomb, which means breaking out means that you need to click the left mouse button in order to break out of it. If you dodge from your entomb, it would not give you the fortify. Last but not least, we have 2 passives left. I didn't pick those 2 here, but I picked this one, which gives me 20% fortify as well whenever I'm using an ability of Ice Gauntlet. And then of course the blocking stamina, which is increasing your survivability a lot if you know how to block with Ice Gauntlet. So I suggest you guys, if you didn't play that much with Ice Gauntlet, try playing around the blocking with it, because every light attack can be blocked and you don't need to waste stamina in order to get away from a light attack. You can simply block it. For example, weapons like hatchet and rapier cannot even break you you can just block with the Ice Gauntlet and everything is fine. The only thing that you need to really pay attention to is some of the abilities and of course the heavy attacks, because they can break your stamina bar. On the left side, another super important thing is, and we have to remember that for later on, the critical rejuvenation, which gives you 15 mana whenever you critically hit a target. Now this applies as well as your Ice Gauntlet attacks to the pylon attacks, which means that if you place a pylon and the pylon crits someone, this will give you 15 mana. As we said in this season, the mana is super important for the mages, and I will go on the second point where we're going to talk about the attributes. Why exactly that's the reason, because previously the mages were not suffering that much with mana, but this season it's completely different. And lastly, increase the critical damage of Ice Gauntlet abilities. This is not that important passive, but it gives you a 10% bonus if your stamina is full and your pylon crits someone. So now, when the first part of the skill tree is already done, let's go over the second part and let me explain you why the mana is such a pain in the ass for the mages in season 3, sorry. So the attributes for the moment on my build looks like this, but of course this is due to the fact that I don't have all the weapons, I don't have all the jewelries as well, so I'm kind of missing a lot of points. At the end, with the full buff of Constitution, my stats should be looking as 50 Strength, 25 Dex, 26 Focus, 150 Constitution, and I believe that in Intelligence I would end up with around 430 points or something like this, but I'm still not sure about it. I didn't really calculate it. So why we are going with this exact distribution of points and not like many of the mages are doing, to go full Intelligence and then the rest in a little bit of Constitution. The reason for that is, like I mentioned in my previous video, the artifact of the medium pants. They are providing us extra points for all other attributes, and basically we are gaining so many attribute points that we can allow ourselves to get the bonuses from the different thresholds. Why we want the bonuses from the different thresholds? Well, I will go over the reason for it. On 25 strength we're gonna get 5% light attack damage, something that mages do. It's not every time, but they do it in order to chain a fast combo of light attacks to get more burning effects. So 5% more damage on it, it's pretty cool to have. Then of course the 50 gives you 10% on the heavy attacks, something that is also super important for all mages. So 10% on heavy attacks is extremely nice, and I already tested it and it's kind of working. It gives me around 200 to 300 more damage on each heavy attack. Then we are looking at the 25 dexterity, which is one of the most important things in the category of attributes because of those 5% critical chance. You may not know, but the critical perks, which were keen and keen awareness on the ring, were nerfed from the previous season. They were giving previously 12% critical chance, but now they are giving, I believe, 7 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's 6.8, but now of course if my weapon goes to 700 it would be around 7%. The same goes for the ring, but due to the fact that it's lower gear score, it's currently showing 6%. So basically having those 5% critical chance is extremely important for your build, because as we know, we are relying on the critical chances to be as high as possible. Then the intelligence is self-explanatory. I don't need to go and explain you why you have to play intelligence on the mage, but just the general idea is that you get a lot of more damage if you go on the intelligence tree instead of going for the strength and then picking up the Inferno artifact fire staff. Please don't do that. The fire staff is meant to be a mage weapon. It's not meant to be paired with swords, shields, hammers and stuff. I know that it could be fun, but it's just how it is. Mage should be a mage from the beginning till the end. One important thing that we can mention on the intelligence side is this here. On 200 intelligence, previously you were getting 10 mana for each dodge. which means that if you are placed correctly on the battlefield and you know how to time your dodges and cancel your attacks, you would never have problems with your mana. Unfortunately, they changed that, and now the mages can only get 10 mana after a critical hit. This is also, and maybe the main reason, why you need to go with Keen. Instead of any other perk, Keen awareness on your ring will guarantee that this value here will be the highest. And as we already mentioned, if you manage to keep the mana over 50%, you would manage to also have the 5% in power, which doesn't sound a lot, but it's actually a really nice boost. So then we go down, we go to the focus. There is 26 focus, which is giving us the 25 threshold, 5% cooldown ability, insanely good value, because the refreshing was capped at 4 pieces maximum. 4 pieces of refreshing currently will give you, as you can see here, it's 16% refreshing of your cooldowns. I have currently 3 pieces, but like I said, my gear is not finalized, so when I have 4, it will be 16%. The only way to go over those 16% is if you use the artifact, which is medium chest, which gives you, I think, a bonus of 8%, but it's not really worth it to lose all those attribute points. That's why we are going with 25 focus, so we can have those 5% extra cooldown reduction. At the end, we are ending up with 21% cooldown reduction overall, which is extremely nice. And then of course, constitution, you need that, you need the health, it's super nice to have it. So on the first, you would see that you have all your consumables are 10% stronger. This applies to all potions and foods and all that. Then on 50 you have 10% physical armor at above 50% health. Then you have increased max health by 10% on 100 con. And the most important, and the reason why we need to go with 150, is because of those 10% critical damage taken. The reason for that is because on season 3, the defensive, which was called previously resilient or reduce critical damage, is now no longer in the game. Resilient is not existing perk. So now all the weight classes have different mitigation of critical damage. Light class have minus 15%, medium have minus 20%, and heavy have minus 25%. Which means that you playing as light, you have a lot of damage taken by critical hits. When you are going 150 con, you are reducing that to again 25%. So that's really crucial. And now with that, we can safely say that the attribute points were explained as well. The next part that we're gonna talk about is the perks and the reasons for those perks. What you can replace those perks with. For the moment, I will go and explain firstly the main weapons for this build. And the reason for that is because there is a lot of discussion about it. A lot of people don't really understand the idea, but I will try to be as quick as possible. For weapon, you need to go with keen, vicious, and keenly empowered. Keen, as I mentioned already many times, is the most important thing for a fire staff because it gives you critical chances. You already saw on different occasions why critical is so beneficial for the fire staff and why it's so important. You cannot skip that. The second place is for vicious, simply because if you're gonna place keen on your build, you are relying on criticals. Vicious is increasing your critical damage on both your attacks and your abilities. If you change that with attunement, which is a good perk as well, attunement is a single target perk and it has a cooldown of 1.5 seconds, which means that if you execute a fast combo of 2 or 3 hits, the attunement will proc only once. As well, if you hit 3 enemies at once, the attunement will hit only one of them, since it's a single target ability. That's why you need to go with vicious and not attunement. Enchanted also is a nice choice, but then you are relying mostly on your light and heavy attacks. You are not relying that much on your abilities, and you are losing the whole value which the Pillar of Fire can provide whenever he crits. Last but not least, keenly empowered is the third perk that I prefer. Again, the reason is because Keenly Empowered will give you Empower and your damage will get boosted. If you change that perk to Attunement or Enchanted, you already know the reasons, but if you want to go and change it to Keenly Jagged, for example, Keenly Jagged is again a single target perk. This perk is doing ticks of damage over time. It can generate your Heart Rune faster, but your damage overall and your AoE damage will not get any increase. That's why I believe the 10% Keenly Empowered is really nice to have. Then we go over the Ice Gauntlet, and unfortunately I don't have the best choice as we are still fresh on the new patch. So for Ice Gauntlet I would usually look for Pylon. Pylon perk is extremely valuable, it's super nice to have, so that's one of the main reasons why I'm using it. I'm using a perk on the weapon just because that's a secondary weapon and I'm mainly focused on the Fire Staff. The Ice Gauntlet is just there to support, so that's why it's fine to take a perk with it. For a second perk or a third perk, if you have legendary option, I would suggest to either go with Vicious or Keenly Jagged, so you can rely on high damage of your Ice Gauntlet and then of course generate your Heart Rune faster. But if you feel like you are having problems with the mana, you are feeling, always your mana is running out and so on, please make sure that you change the Vicious to Keen as well, because the Keen will increase the critical chance of the Pylon, and therefore the Pylon might give you those 15 mana back whenever it scores a critical hit. Then we can go over the normal armor, which is head, chest, gloves, pants and boots. And again, I will say that I don't have the perfect armor yet, but I'm still working towards that. The best 3 perks that you can have is health on first place, the second would be fire harnessing, and then it would be enchanted ward or refreshing. Of course, we need to save 2 slots on our gear, which we're gonna use for the fireball and the pillar perk. Unfortunately, for the moment, I don't have any of those pieces, but you have that in mind. So our aim and our goal would be to have 5 health perks on all our armors, as we have 5 of them. Then we would want to have 4 fire harnessing perks, which will be increasing our fire damage by 8%, and they will be 4 because on the pants you can only choose 1 perk, and that should be the health perk. Unfortunately, the pants are going with refreshing and elemental aversion, so you cannot add a secondary perk apart from the health. Then we are looking at few other slots in which we have to place our fireball and pillar perks. And for the rest, it's up to you guys to choose. If you want to go a little bit more defensive, you can go with enchanted ward or elemental or physical aversion, but I think enchanted ward would be the best. And then you can also use that for refreshing. Refreshing is generally used as an offensive perk, so you can do that as well. Last but not least, we have to go over the jewelries, and unfortunately my jewelries, as I mentioned earlier, they are not up to date and they are not 700 gear score. However, the most important thing is to see the perks that we are going for, so I can simply show you that. For the amulet, I would suggest you to go with health, shirking empower and trust protection. The reason for that is health will give you more defensive stats, trust protection will give you a lot of nice sustainability through all the fights with rapiers, spears, muskets and bows, even some of the attacks of the sword and shield. So trust protection and health are the mandatory ones. Shirking empower is really nice to empower yourself, but if you feel struggle with fighting people or surviving, please make sure to change that to stamina recovery or something else that is also defensive, like divine for example, or something like that. Shirking empower is super nice to increase your empower cap. And also, one small trick, whenever you use a ice tomb and you get hit into the ice tomb, you will basically get shirking empower stacks. This is causing the shirking empower to proc, and it will give you a nice boost of 4 stacks actually super fast for the next 10 seconds, which is extremely nice. Then we are looking at the ring. Of course, Hearty and Keen, no doubt here. Those are the two perks that you cannot go without. The Keen, as I said many times, it's super nice to have, increasing the critical chance. Hearty will increase your stamina. The one extra dodge is mandatory to have. Even now on medium, due to the fact that they changed the medium dodge, you really need that. For the last perk, I would suggest you to change Invigorated Punishment since it got nerfed. So basically now it's instead of 2% and 8 stacks max, it's 1% with 10 stacks max. The only problem is that nobody is reaching those 10 stacks, and this is only applying for your abilities. So all your attacks will not gain those extra damages. I would change personally the Invigorated Punishment with Refreshing, so I can have one more slot of Refreshing here for the ring. Then looking at the earring, again, I don't have the best example, but this one is super nice to use until I reach the seasonal pass 100, where I can get the artifact for the earring, which I, prefer to use. So for the earring perks, actually, I think we can just discuss what the seasonal pass one gives. It would basically give you Fortifying Toast, which is providing you extra 45 for the following seconds. Empowering Toast, which will provide you 10% empower for the next few seconds. Your health potions will have higher value of 33%, but unfortunately you will lose 20% of their cooldown. I think that's a fair trade as we are playing from a distance, and it's not that big of a problem to make ourselves on a good position and simply don't use that many health potions. For a last perk, I was thinking before to use Healthy Toast so I can drink my mana potions, but unfortunately now, in wars, in OPRs I believe as well, and in arenas, whenever you are playing, you cannot use the consumables in your inventory, which means that you are only allowed to use your hotbar. Therefore, I think going for Refreshing instead of Healthy Toast would be a better choice, because then you can use the Oak Flesh Balm, the Gemstone Dust, and of course the infused protection potions, which are, for example, infused fire, infused arcane, infused whatever else you want to use on the slot of the mana potion. I think that's way better and of course more defensive than the 1.5k HP that you're gonna receive. 5k HP that you're gonna receive. And with that, guys, I think we are finished with the perks, with the gear that we have to use and why we have to use it. Please, if you have questions, let me know and we can go for the next topic, which will be the Heart Rune and all the different options and why, in which cases, we have to play those different runes. Okay. So the next part that we're gonna talk about is the Heart Rune and their different types of Heart Rune which we can use. In my personal opinion, the best Heart Rune to use in Season 3 is the Biobomb. The reason for that is because a lot of the fights will be forced into a clump and there will be so many people stacked in one place that you would get a lot of value using this Heart Rune. This Heart Rune, for those of you who don't know, is spitting a cloud of poison, which is decreasing the enemy's healing effects by 30% for 8 seconds unless they cleanse the debuff. Of course, this has its own perks, and as you can see in the bottom, it has a Crippling Biobomb, which is basically slowing the target's movement speed by 20%, and Exhausting, which is causing their stamina to recover slower by another 30%. If you want to execute different clumps, if you want to damage a lot of those people that are there and finish them off before they get healed, I think that's one of the best options for use. But if you want to go single target and you want to chase healer, for example, or other assassins or dex users, I believe that cannon is one of the best that you can use as well. The cannon, self-explanatory, you are firing a cannon that deals a lot of damage, and of course it has burning effect if the target is not finished, and it also deals AoE damage, so if there is enemies nearby, they will be also hit. Of course the radius is just 3 meters, so it will not have an impact on targets further than that, but it's a super nice heart rune to use for single target damage. One other thing for the heart rune of the cannon blast is that whenever you use the cannon, you are gaining grit. So sometimes you can use that to your advantage, and if for example you see a spear that wants to knock you down, you can use it in order to prevent the knockdown animation to get you on the ground. The next really good heart rune that you can use, but I don't really tested it yet, is the Firestorm. The Firestorm, unfortunately I don't have a fully finished upgraded version. The Firestorm can be used in order to cleanse all your teammates into those fights that I already said about, and of course to empower them with a little bit of extra damage. As you can see, this can be caused from range, which is leaving you on a knife safe spot away from the fight, and you are not forced into the fight, so you are not risking your life. The runes that are changed from the last season, and they are not so efficient as they were before, is of course the Detonate, since now the Detonate is dealing 20% less damage from what it was doing before, and of course while charging the Detonate you are rending yourself, which is decreasing your armor and magic resistances up to 50%. This is the reason why Detonate is not so popular anymore. Of course you can still run it, but it's just not a good trade-off, and you would be forcing yourself to play with a lot of risk and a lot of danger. Another really nice rune, but not for a mage class, is the Vines, which is also something amazing to use on those clumps, but unfortunately you would have to go close, so that's why it's not that great on a mage, as you would be again putting yourself and your life at risk. So if you want to play it, of course you can do, but have that in mind. One other good rune, but this is mainly for solo play, and of course if you want to just go out and fight people in open world, is of course the Stoneform. It's an amazing rune, but in the mass PvP, which is OPR or wars, even in arenas, I don't think this rune should be used on a mage, simply because it doesn't provide anything to your teammates, you cannot really help them with it, and they will not gain anything from you surviving. This rune should be used only from the healers in mass PvP, because the healers, as we know, are super important for the fight, as if they die, the healings are no longer there and we will die soon after. So with that guys, I think the heart runes are now explained as well. If you have questions, please let me know, and we can continue down to the last, but of course not the least point, where we will discuss the complete overview of defense, how we should use our gems, how we should place our gems in our armors and weapons, and of course we're gonna explain a little bit about the fortify, the rends, and all those things. In Season 2, the main source of damage was mainly physical. This is the reason because many of the builds were involving hatchets, spears, sword and shields, great swords, of course great axe, and not to forget the ranged ones, bow and musket. However, in Season 3 we see a lot of diversity in the different damage types, and of course many of the artifacts are providing different kind of elemental damage. Also we have to take in mind that a lot of people are splitting their damage into elemental, so therefore I believe that the elemental damage in general will be super high for the whole season to come. That's why I suggest you to go with opal gems in your gear, which will provide you with 2.5 elemental damage absorption for each opal slotted in your armory section plus your jewelry section. However, as we are going for the rune glass option of opal, we will reduce that defense from the elemental damage to 2%, but in fact we will get 2% more fire damage. The reason for that is because if you use 5 of those rune glass opals, you would receive a 10% damage boost, which will count towards the empower cap. The empower cap will be explained a little bit later, but you will get the whole idea. So if we're gonna use 5 opals on our armor, and we rune glass all of them, we would receive a 10% defensive stat for all elemental types of damage. If we use also 1 or 2 opals in our jewelry, unfortunately there you cannot rune glass them, so they have to be the basic version, you would receive either 12.5 or 15% of elemental protection. If you use trust protection on your amulet, you would get 15% trust protection, and of course this will benefit your defense towards enemies such as spear, rapier, bow and musket. And of course I believe that the last slot, maybe on your any jewelry actually, can be used again into either slash protection, which is the moonstone, it will provide you 6% defense, or you can use another emerald, which will give you another 6% of trust protection. I suggest you to wait a little bit and see why you have to use one of the two, because mainly you would die from one of the two sources. If you feel like there are a lot of sword and shields, or maybe great axe users, or for example great sword users, which are all using slash attacks, maybe you would want to slot the moonstone. If you want to use the trust protection, you better be sure that there are many enemies using the bow, the musket or spears basically, so therefore you can go with the trust protection. For the weapons, the topic is a little bit different, so I will try to again explain it in a fast fashion. As you can see, I'm currently using a tier 2 gem for my fire staff. Maybe you would be surprised to see, but this actually provides you more damage burst than using the normal rune glass, which many people opt for. The main difference could be tested as well, but I will just try to explain it so you can get the idea. If you split yourself into a secondary elemental damage, due to the fact of the intelligence attributes, your secondary damage, in this case electricity or lightning damage, will basically give you more into the For the weapons, the things are looking a little bit different from the other combinations and the other options that we have. For the fire staff, for example, the best option in my opinion is to use tier 2 gem. The reason for that is because whenever you slot a tier 2 gem and you scale your secondary damage from your main source into another intelligence based damage, you would receive bonus on that secondary due to the fact how the attributes of intelligence work. With simple words, you would get higher values from tier 2 than just placing an opal, which will be mainly rune glassed with fire. That's the reason also why the fire damage will be blocked by enemies protection, but if they are not running that many opals and they don't have other protections such as nature or electric or arcane and any other, you can basically get free damage on those stats. Also, the reason for using tier 2 gem is because on the initial impact or the initial hit to a target, you are receiving more damage values than the actual rune glass. The rune glass will only get up with more damage with the time effect of the rune glass dot, which is after 2 or 3 seconds. Also, the last but not least, and maybe the most important, is that whenever you use a tier 2 gem, there is no different scenarios of you need to dodge in order to hit more, you need to be full health, you need to do this or that. You simply get the bonus damage and that's about it. If you use an opal, you need to have your stamina lower than max in order to deal the extra damage. If you use diamond, you need to have full HP at all times in order to get the bonus, and of course many other different options are asking you to have different scenarios. For the secondary weapon, which is your ice gauntlet, you would want to have a rune glass. It doesn't really matter what type of rune glass elemental damage it will deal, as long as it applies stacks to the enemies getting hit by the pylon. The reason for that is because each hit of the pylon, after applying the stacks of rune glass, will generate your heart rune even faster. If you have keenly jagged as well, and it get applied after a critical hit, you would get double dot on the enemy, which will generate your rune extremely fast. If you want to go into further details why those gems are the best in slot for fire ice, I can also discuss that with you guys in my Discord community where we usually have those topics. With that, I believe that the build is finally explained to everyone, and I believe that it's so clean and clear that you would be able to understand it. Please let me know in the comments below or in my Discord community what you feel I should do next. I have in mind to prepare a Firestaff Blunderbuss in light, but if you want I can maybe go over Firestaff Void Gauntlet as well. Also, if you feel like I missed something or I didn't explain something very well, you should be able to discuss that with me as a feedback. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching and I will see you on the next one.